Christopher Luxon seems like a nice guy and says a lot of reassuring things, but do National's policies stack up? Take their plan to raise $740 million a year by ending the ban on foreigners buying New Zealand houses. National proposes to let foreigners buy houses over $2 million, paying a 15% tax, and says this will bring in about $740 million per year. Nice. But do they realise some foreign buyers will be exempt from this tax because of our free trade agreements, and that our tax treaties actually prohibit this kind of extra tax? Luxon's deputy recently admitted that they didn't even seek advice before announcing this policy. Even if we could break our treaties, the figures don't make sense. To get that $740 million in taxes, we'd need to sell $4.9 billion of property to foreigners every year. That's something like 2,000 homes at an average price of $2.5 million each. In 2018, the last year before foreigners were banned from buying in New Zealand, only 200 homes total sold for over $2 million. That's not just sales to foreigners, that's sales total. Selling to foreigners also means that any rental on these houses leaves our economy and goes overseas, and when the house is resold, that money leaves our economy too. Christopher Luxon says our current government shouldn't have let its costs increase by 80%. But there were some good reasons. Anyone remember COVID-19? And there has been record spending on transport, housing, health, education, climate action, and more. Teachers are no longer so pitifully underpaid. More hospitals are being built to keep step with our rapidly growing population. And we have our biggest housing boom since the 1950s, with thousands of new social housing units. All of this will provide economic stimulus and long-term economic growth, as well as a social safety net and better disaster preparedness. National, on the other hand, leans towards austerity, which we've seen enough examples of now to know that it only depresses an economy even more. Many economists argue for fiscal restraint during times of economic growth to build up our buffers, but higher spending during downturns to support the economy. And New Zealand's public spending isn't actually that high. We spend less as a percentage of GDP than Australia or even post-austerity Britain. But National wants to gut $16 billion from our spending while supposedly preserving frontline services. But if you remove back office workers, leaving just the front line, then medical staff, teachers and police just have to take on that work themselves, pulling them away from the front line. Health, education and law enforcement suffer no matter how you cut it. Promising to send young offenders to boot camps may appeal to our vindictive impulses, but it won't make our society safer in the way that funding of law enforcement and rehabilitation will. An increasing wealth gap between rich and poor, on the other hand, which National seems dead set on, is certain to encourage crime. But they paint a rosy picture. They say their tax plan will leave workers on a minimum wage $20 better off per fortnight, even though they opposed every increase in minimum wage pushed through by Labour, the Greens and Te Pāti Māori, which gave recipients an extra $556 per fortnight. They say that average income families with children will be $250 a week better off, but when economists picked this apart, they found that only 3,000 families nationwide, a tiny percentage, would see this much benefit. National promises a climate dividend for households, riffing on a great idea that's been in circulation for some years, that we could be taxing fossil fuels and returning all the proceeds to citizens as a dividend. It would create a strong incentive to shift away from dangerous carbon pollution, while leaving the majority of New Zealanders, especially those in lower income brackets, financially better off. But National subverts this idea completely, because it turns out that they're simply raiding the revenue from our emissions trading scheme, whose proceeds currently pay for carbon cutting policies and climate mitigation to support vulnerable communities. National's dividend will not even be given out as a dividend. They are simply breaking open that fund to pay for their spending on tax cuts and new roads. At the same time, They will scrap the Auckland regional fuel tax, leaving a $2 billion hole in Auckland's public transport, meaning that young people will no longer have free travel, and transport improvements such as light rail and electrifying the bus fleet will be halted. National will make public transport more expensive and less convenient, encourage more people to drive, and build new regional feeder roads to funnel even more cars into Auckland's already gridlocked centre. Roads will be even more dangerous and congested. National casts itself as the party of fiscal responsibility, but their figures don't add up, and historically they've balanced their overspending by selling off our money-making assets for a quick buck. That's not responsible. I expect they'll do the same this time round. Behind all its rhetoric, National's plan is the same as it always has been. Drive up house prices, build more roads, and get our country back on clearance sale.